Christmas Eve should have been glowing with laughter and the smell of cinnamon pies, but in my parents' house it turned into the moment they erased me from their bloodline. My name is Claire Mitchell, and I was 28, standing by the Christmas tree, holding a small wrapped gift, when my father Robert rose from his chair and struck me so hard across the face that I crashed against the dining table. The white tablecloth turned red as my mouth split open and drops of blood stained the plates meant for dessert. My ears rang with carols from outside children singing, while inside my family turned my life into a nightmare. My mother Diane leaned close enough for me to feel her perfume and whispered with the calm of a prayer, "You are dead to us." The words cut sharper than my father's hand. Guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved to help. My brother Ethan slumped drunk in his chair, raised his glass and laughed as if my humiliation were a joke shared only with him. My father sat back down, carving meat as if nothing had happened. That night, I realized they would rather see me broken than see me free. And that Christmas was the day my family chose to bury me alive. Blood still dripped from my lip, but instead of shock or concern, my mother Diane smoothed the wrinkles of her red dress and spoke to the guests with a steady smile, insisting that I had only tripped against the table. Her voice was firm and pleasant, like she was explaining away a spilled glass of wine. I tried to protest, but my father Robert barked at me to sit down and stop creating drama. My head throbbed and every breath hurt, yet the worst pain was the way their words twisted what had just happened. Diane turned back to me with her eyes sharp and cold and whispered again that I was dead to them, that my place at the table no longer existed. Ethan leaned forward, grinning drunkenly, and announced to everyone that I had always been the family embarrassment. He said Claire cannot even keep a job without crying, and she makes up stories to get attention. The room fell into a chilling silence, broken only by the clinking of forks as the guests forced themselves to continue eating. I stood frozen, bleeding into a napkin and waiting for someone to stand up for me, but no one dared. Diane lifted her glass and toasted the holiday, talking about church donations and community service, as though her daughter was not sitting at the table shaking. Robert nodded along and praised Ethan for his business ventures, steering the conversation away from me every time I opened my mouth. My father said Ethan will carry the Mitchell name with pride, unlike certain weaklings. The words cut deeper than the blow to my face. Ethan smirked and ordered another drink, while Diane laughed softly to cover the tension. Each sentence they spoke erased me further from reality, as though rewriting the story in front of witnesses could make it true. My legs trembled, but I remained standing because I knew if I sat, I would vanish entirely. The Christmas tree lights blinked cheerfully behind me, but the warmth had drained from the room. I was now cast as the villain in my own home. Gaslighting became their weapon and silence their shield, while I was left bleeding and unheard. As I stood trembling by the table, my mind drifted backward, pulled into memories that felt like a cruel contrast to the nightmare unfolding before me. I thought of Christmas mornings when I was a child, waking up to stockings stuffed with candy and a tree glimmering with tinsel. Back then, I still believed my family could be warm, that love lived inside these walls. I remembered running down the stairs in pajamas, clutching a doll, while Ethan bragged about the expensive toys he got. Even then, my parents favored him, their voices brighter when they called his name, their hugs longer when they praised his talents. I told myself I was simply quieter, more bookish, that they would love me differently but equally. Tonight proved that lie had stretched too thin. Only a few months earlier, I had crossed the stage at my graduation, clutching my master's degree in biomedical engineering. The applause filled the auditorium, yet the 2 seats I had reserved for Robert and Diane sat empty. They had sent only a curt text saying they were busy. I told myself maybe they were proud, but did not know how to show it. Later, I received a job offer from a research company in Boston, a chance to begin a life of independence. I wanted so badly to share that news with them, to see even a flicker of recognition that their daughter had achieved something monumental. Instead, my mother brushed off my excitement with a shallow smile, saying, "We will see if it lasts." My father muttered that book learning does not keep food on the table like Ethan's business does. I swallowed the disappointment, believing Christmas might be the moment to heal. That is why I had wrapped gifts with such care. For my mother, I knitted a scarf in her favorite burgundy shade, hoping she would feel warmth each time she wore it. For my father, I framed an old photograph of the family from when I was 8, still small enough to sit on his lap. For Ethan, I bought tickets to a jazz concert in the city because once he had told me he loved live music. I carried those presents into the house with trembling hope, thinking maybe tonight they would see me as more than a shadow. Instead, my gifts lay unopened under the tree while Robert's blow split my lip and Diane's words cut my soul. That night, my childhood memories of Christmas joy twisted into ghosts mocking me. I realized the hope I carried into the house was nothing more than an illusion, and every smile I had longed for was a mask hiding their contempt. The image of my degree still fresh in my mind dangled like a cruel joke. Miguel. My mother's proud tears and my father's reluctant smile existed only in daydreams. The truth had been exposed under the glow of Christmas lights. I was not the daughter they loved, I was the burden they disowned. That knowledge slammed into me harder than the strike to my face. It left me hollow and cold inside a room filled with people who pretended not to see me bleeding. That flashback of hope lost became the cruelest cut of all because it showed me what I had dreamed of having but would never receive. The memory of my graduation faded as reality snapped back with brutal force. My father, Robert, pushed his chair back so hard, it scraped against the hardwood floor, and in one swift motion he grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head backward until tears sprang to my eyes. My scalp burned with the pull, and before I could breathe, he slammed my forehead against the edge of the dining table. A loud crack echoed through the room, followed by the shatter of a wine glass that toppled over. My body went limp for a moment as the taste of iron filled my mouth and blood streamed down my chin. Guests gasped, but no one stood. Ethan leaned forward, his drunken grin widening as if he were watching a spectacle meant to entertain him. He slurred that Claire has always needed discipline. Diane placed a hand on Robert's arm, not to stop him, but to steady his anger as though guiding him in performance. She said calmly, "Do not overdo it. People are watching." The humiliation stabbed deeper than the pain in my skull. I clutched at the table edge, trying to steady myself, yet Robert's grip only tightened. He muttered that you will learn to respect this family, or you will not be part of it. With another shove, he released me and I collapsed onto the carpet, my vision swimming. The world spun in dizzy circles while the blinking Christmas lights blurred into streaks of red and green that seemed to laugh at me. I tried to crawl away, but Ethan stepped closer, towering above me, his whiskey glass dangling from his hand. He tipped the glass, letting the amber liquid splash onto my hair, and he chuckled. "You smell better like this." His words carried the foul weight of cruelty practiced over years. My heart pounded in my chest as shame clawed at me. Diane stood and adjusted her pearls, then turned to the guests and said, "She is exaggerating again. She always does." The guests shifted uneasily, some staring at their plates, some pretending to check their phones. Not one of them spoke in my defense. Robert returned to his seat, carving slices of ham as though nothing had happened. Ethan toasted to family, raising his glass high while I wiped at the blood dripping into my eyes. I looked down and saw dark red spots staining the white carpet, spreading like evidence no one would acknowledge. Every nerve in my body screamed with pain, yet worse was the realization that the people I had called family felt no guilt in displaying their violence so openly. They knew the witnesses would stay silent because silence had always protected them. My breathing grew ragged as I pushed myself onto my knees. I whispered, "Why?" And the only answer came from Diane's cold voice. "Because you are not one of us anymore." My chest ached as if the words themselves had struck me again. I tried to rise, but Ethan pressed his hand against my shoulder, forcing me back down. His eyes gleamed with triumph, the way a predator glories over a wounded prey. Outside, I heard faint Carol's children singing joy to the world. While inside, my father struck me, my mother disowned me, and my brother mocked me. The contrast seared my mind like a scar. I realized in that moment that this was not an accident, not a temporary burst of temper. It was a declaration, a deliberate erasure of me from their lives. I was not only bleeding in body, but being erased in spirit. My gifts still sat unopened under the tree, their bows intact as though mocking my foolish hope. The tragedy of that night was not only the violence, it was the certainty that the people who should have loved me most had chosen to destroy me instead. That truth settled over me heavier than the pain and left me staring at the blinking lights, knowing my nightmare had only just begun. I remained on the floor, trembling with blood dripping down my chin, waiting for someone to pull me up. Yet no hand reached for me. Robert calmly wiped his knife with a napkin and sliced another piece of ham, chewing slowly as though nothing had happened. Diane poured fresh wine into her glass and with a bright voice asked one of the guests about the church fundraiser scheduled for New Year's Eve. Her tone was smooth, elegant, even as if the sight of her daughter sprawled on the carpet was nothing more than a shadow in the corner of the room. Ethan leaned back in his chair, raising his glass high and slurring to family. His toast drew a weak chorus of agreement from the guests who clinked glasses and forced polite smiles. Their eyes darted toward me but quickly slid away, as if staring too long might make them responsible. I pressed the napkin to my mouth and struggled to stand, but my legs shook beneath me. Diane noticed my movement and said in a sharp whisper, "Stop trying to draw attention, Claire. You always make things worse." Her words landed heavier than my father's blow because they told me clearly that my pain would never be acknowledged. I staggered toward the tree, hoping to grab my coat, but Robert snapped, "Sit down now." His voice cut through the room like a whip, and out of instinct I froze. My body obeyed, even while my heart screamed for freedom. Diane turned back to the guests, apologizing for the disruption. She told them Claire has been under stress lately, and sometimes she imagines slights where none exist. The gaslighting was performed with such precision that heads began to nod around the table. I stood there invisible in my own skin. Ethan laughed again and tapped his glass against the table, chanting "Weakling, weakling," until Robert ordered him to stop. Even then, his smirk remained fixed like victory carved into his face. My gifts sat untouched beneath the tree while the family meal continued without pause. Forks clattered, glasses were raised, and laughter resumed in forced bursts while I stood bleeding, ignored, erased. The betrayal was not just in their violence, but in their ability to return to normal conversation while I trembled in front of them. The candles flickered, the ornaments glimmered, and my parents carried on as though their daughter had never existed. At that moment, I realized I had been abandoned in full view of others and no one would speak for me. The room felt colder than the snow outside, and I knew I was truly alone. I stumbled out into the night, clutching my coat around my shoulders, the freezing air biting against the cuts on my face. Snowflakes swirled under the streetlight, and my breath came out in ragged clouds. Behind me, the warm glow of the Mitchell house pulsed with muffled laughter and clinking glasses as if nothing had shattered inside me. My boots slipped on the icy walkway, and I nearly collapsed again, but a porch light across the street flicked on. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Linda Walker, my elderly neighbor who had lived beside my parents for decades, stepped out wrapped in a heavy cardigan. She gasped when she saw me hunched over with blood staining my cheek. Without hesitation, she hurried down the steps, her slippers crunching in the snow, and she placed a firm arm around my shoulders. "Come inside, child." Her voice carried both command and compassion. "You cannot stay out here." I let her guide me into her small living room that smelled of peppermint tea and old books. The contrast from my parents' home was stark. Instead of cold polished surfaces and staged perfection, there were quilts draped over worn furniture and framed photos of grandchildren smiling. Linda eased me into an armchair and pressed a warm towel to my split lip. She shook her head, muttering, "Some families do not deserve the children they are given." My chest tightened at her words because they named the truth I had been too afraid to say. She brought me a steaming mug of tea, her hands steady despite the shock in her eyes. As I sipped the bitter liquid, the heat spread through me, and for the first time that night, I felt something like safety. Linda did not ask endless questions. She simply said, "You are not alone tonight." She offered me a spare blanket and insisted I stay until I felt strong enough to move. Tears blurred my vision, not from pain, but from the sudden weight of kindness. The cruelty of my parents and the mockery of my brother still throbbed in my skull, but here in this quiet house, I realized I had been given a witness, someone who had seen me as more than a ghost. The storm outside rattled the windows, yet I felt steadier. That moment with Linda did not erase what had been done to me, but it lit a small flame inside my chest. While my family celebrated my erasure, my neighbor handed me dignity back in the form of tea, a towel, and a simple truth. "Sometimes God leaves a witness," she said softly, and I clung to her words as though they were a lifeline. The warmth of Linda's home carried me through the night, but when dawn broke and the sky turned pale gray, the heaviness in my chest reminded me that kindness alone would not erase what had happened. Linda insisted I rest and gave me her phone to call anyone I trusted, but I stared at the screen with no one to dial. Instead, I scrolled through old messages, searching for proof that I still belonged somewhere. That was when I noticed that the family group chat had gone silent on my device. My hands trembled as I tried to log in again and found that the chat was renamed Mitchell 4. I remembered clearly that it had once been Mitchell 5 because I had been the fifth member. My heart pounded as I checked the list of participants. My name was gone, my photo erased. The most recent message was from Ethan posting a picture of himself holding a champagne glass with the caption, "Cheers to family." My stomach twisted as if the floor had dropped away beneath me. They had not even waited a day after Christmas to delete me. I showed Linda, who sighed and said they want to rewrite you out of their story. That afternoon, she left me alone to rest, but my mind would not settle. I borrowed her old laptop and began digging further. I accessed my email, searching for anything unusual. What I found made my blood run cold. A notification from the insurance company had arrived in my inbox 2 days earlier, one that I had never opened. It showed a policy update for Robert Mitchell claiming damages for property, but noting no injuries reported. My name was nowhere in the document. They had filed me out of existence. The image of my father's signature stared back at me clean and deliberate. My mother's approval sat beside it in neat script. They had taken my beating and my humiliation and twisted it into paperwork that painted a picture of a family unharmed. I closed the laptop shaking and paced the living room. Memories began to align in new and darker ways. I remembered Diane's words during the party telling the guests Claire exaggerates. I remembered Ethan's laughter the way he called me weakling. None of it was spontaneous. It was calculated to undermine me to prepare the story so that if I ever spoke out, I would not be believed. Later that evening, Linda returned with soup and sat beside me. She told me in hushed tones that at church, Diane had been overheard telling friends that her daughter had gone away to Boston early and would not be seen again for some time. The lie rolled off her tongue so easily that people nodded without question. Linda said she could hardly believe it, but hearing it from Diane's own lips left no doubt. My chest burned with rage, but also with clarity. It was not just that my family had attacked me. They were burying me alive in lies. I decided then that silence would finish what they started. If I stayed quiet, I would vanish exactly as they wanted. So I began to collect evidence. I reopened the chat thread and took screenshots of the name change, the absence of my profile, the posts made immediately afterward. I printed the insurance update and highlighted the absence of my name. I even photographed the bruises that bloomed across my arms and the gash on my forehead before they could fade. Linda watched me quietly, then nodded approvingly. She said sometimes the only way to fight a lie is with more truth than they can deny. Her words strengthened me. That night, I lay awake on her sofa replaying every detail of the evening at my parents' house. I remembered the way Robert's hand felt against my scalp. I remembered Diane whispering, "You are dead to us." I remembered Ethan's cruel smile. Each memory was a shard of glass, but I pressed them together into a mosaic of truth. The more I pieced it together, the clearer it became. They had not only disowned me, they had crafted a version of reality where I had never existed. That was the discovery that seared itself into me. It was not a single act of violence, but a campaign of erasure. By the time the sun rose again, my plan had solidified. I would not remain their ghost. I would build a record so undeniable that their lies would collapse under its weight. The truth was painful, but it was mine, and I would not let them take it away. The decision hardened in me like ice, and when morning light spilled through Linda's lace curtains, I rose with a grim purpose. My body ached, and every step reminded me of the blows from Robert's fists, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. I began by organizing everything I had gathered into folders on Linda's old laptop. Screenshots of the family chat deletion, the insurance document that erased me, and the photos of my bruises, each labeled with dates and times. I drafted a timeline starting from the graduation they ignored leading up to Christmas Eve and the violence that followed. Every detail mattered because lies thrive in gaps, and I would leave them none. Linda watched me from her rocking chair and offered to testify if needed. Her words gave me courage because I knew the weight of her age and reputation would matter. Still, I realized evidence alone was not enough. I needed someone who knew how to wield it. That afternoon, I searched for attorneys specializing in domestic abuse and fraudulent claims. My hands shook as I made the call, but when a calm voice answered, I felt steadier. Her name was Olivia Grant, a 35-year-old attorney with a reputation for taking cases others considered too messy. She listened silently as I spilled out my story, her only interruptions gentle requests for clarification. After half an hour, she said clearly, "Claire, if you want justice, you must be ready for a public fight. This will not stay private." I closed my eyes, thought of Robert's hand in my hair, and Diane's whisper telling me I was dead to them, and I said, "I am ready." Olivia arranged to meet me in her office the next day. When I arrived, still bruised and wearing borrowed clothes, she looked me over without pity, only with resolve. She explained the legal avenues available: filing for protection, suing for damages, and most importantly, exposing the fraudulent insurance claim. She told me that people like my family thrived on silence and respectability, but documentation could pierce that armor. Together, we sorted through the evidence, and she instructed me to keep a journal of every memory that surfaced and every interaction connected to the abuse. At her suggestion, I also began drafting a statement for the public. At first, the thought terrified me. Sharing my shame, my pain with strangers felt unbearable. Yet Olivia reminded me that the court of public opinion could hold power when institutions hesitated. She said your family counts on your silence. Break it, and you break them. That night I returned to Linda's and sat with the glow of her small Christmas tree illuminating the room. I typed out my story, shaking with each word, but refusing to stop. By dawn, I had a draft that told the truth. Plainly, my father struck me. My mother disowned me, my brother mocked me, and together they erased me. I saved it along with the photos and screenshots in a folder marked Justice. Over the next days, Olivia guided me step by step. We documented injuries with a sympathetic doctor, we filed preliminary complaints, and she prepared motions. Meanwhile, I prepared myself emotionally by reading the statement aloud to Linda, who nodded through tears. She told me your voice is stronger than their lies. With each rehearsal, my fear lessened and my anger sharpened. I realized my greatest weapon was not revenge, but clarity. The more I faced the truth, the less power their gaslighting held. When Olivia asked if I was willing to go public online, I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. Together, we prepared a controlled release of my story with supporting evidence. It would not be a rant, but a measured testimony impossible to dismiss. As I pressed save on the final document, I felt a shift deep within me. I was no longer the girl cowering under Robert's fists or Diane's words. I was a woman wielding truth as armor and weapon. My family thought they had buried me under silence, but I was digging my way out with facts and resolve. This was the beginning of my counterattack, and for the first time in years, I felt stronger than their cruelty. The day I pressed publish on my statement, the air felt heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. My words were simple but raw. I described the Christmas Eve beating my mother's declaration that I was dead to them and the erasure of my name from records and chats. I attached images of my bruised face and screenshots of the group thread renamed Mitchell 4. Within an hour, the post began to spread across social media. At first, the comments were disbelief mixed with sympathy, but soon outrage caught fire. Strangers wrote that no child should be treated this way. Others demanded accountability, and local news outlets started calling. A hashtag emerged on its own, Justice for Claire, and it trended by evening. My phone buzzed nonstop as messages flooded in. Some from women who had survived similar abuse, some from old classmates who admitted they always suspected my parents favored Ethan too much. The validation was overwhelming and frightening at the same time. Olivia called and said this momentum was valuable, but we had to be strategic. She filed formal charges for domestic abuse negligence and fraudulent insurance claims the very same day. Reporters showed up at Linda's porch, but she politely directed them to Olivia's office. My parents' reaction was swift. Diane posted a photo of a candle with a caption about forgiveness and Storms pretending to be a saint. Robert issued a terse statement through a lawyer denying all allegations and insisting that I was unstable. Ethan vanished from his accounts altogether, but the silence of their defense only fueled suspicion. Talk shows picked up the story and debated whether a family would really abandon a daughter at Christmas. The image of my bloody face beside a glowing Christmas tree appeared on evening broadcasts. I felt exposed, yet strangely powerful. Olivia prepared me for the courtroom. She said the defense would attempt to paint me as emotional and unreliable, but the evidence was too strong. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, I dressed in plain navy slacks and blouse, refusing to hide the fading bruise on my cheek. Linda walked beside me into the courthouse, her arm steadying mine. Reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions. I kept my head high, though my heart pounded. Inside the courtroom, I saw them for the first time since that night. Robert sat rigid in a dark suit, his jaw clenched as if he were chewing anger. Diane wore black with pearl earrings, her face set in practiced sorrow. Ethan looked restless in a too-tight sports coat, his eyes avoiding mine. The judge entered and the room fell silent. Olivia began with calm precision, presenting the photographs, the insurance record, and Linda's sworn statement. She played an audio file of Diane telling neighbors at church that I had already gone away to Boston. The judge's brow furrowed. Then Olivia called Linda to the stand. My neighbor's voice was steady as she described finding me bleeding and shaking in the snow. She said no parent should abandon their child in such a state. Her words cut through the courtroom with the authority of truth. Next, Olivia displayed the group chat screenshots showing the date the family thread shifted from 5 members to 4 within hours after the attack. The courtroom murmured. Ethan shifted in his seat, his face pale. Olivia turned toward the bench and said, "This is not only a case of violence, but of erasure, a deliberate attempt to wipe Claire Mitchell out of existence on paper and in memory." My breath caught at the force of her words. Then came my turn. My knees trembled as I stood, but when I looked at the judge, I steadied. I told the court my name is Claire Mitchell. I was never missing. I was left behind. I described the strike of Robert's hand, Diane's cold whisper, Ethan's drunken laughter. I did not cry. I did not scream. I spoke each word clearly, forcing them into the record. When I finished, the silence was thick until the judge nodded gravely. Olivia sat me down and rested a hand on mine in reassurance. The defense attempted to respond, claiming I had exaggerated, but each point collapsed under the evidence. When they argued, no injuries were reported. Olivia held up medical records and photographs. When they claimed I had left voluntarily, Linda repeated her testimony of pulling me from the snow. The more they spoke, the weaker their defense appeared. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. When I emerged, flashing bulbs blinded me, but I walked steadily down the steps. Reporters shouted questions, but I gave only one line. I said my family tried to bury me in silence. Today, I speak so the world knows I am still here. That clip aired nationwide and the comments multiplied. Strangers called me brave survivors, reached out to thank me, and the Mitchell family name became a symbol of betrayal. For days, the news cycle replayed images of my bruises beside holiday lights. Olivia warned me they would strike back harder, but she also said they were losing ground fast. Each denial only drew more scrutiny, and for the first time I felt the tide turning. They had tried to silence me in private, but now the truth was echoing louder than their lies. This was not just my fight anymore. It had become a public reckoning. The confrontation I had feared for years was unfolding in full daylight, and I was not alone. Just when I thought the case had reached its highest pitch, Olivia received a call that shifted the ground beneath all of us. A man named Jake Miller, 29 years old, once a close friend of Ethan's, had been following the news coverage. He reached out saying he carried a truth that had haunted him for years. Olivia arranged for him to meet us in her office under strict confidentiality. When Jake walked in, his hands trembled, but his eyes were clear. He admitted that on more than one occasion he had seen Ethan drunk behind the wheel, not just on Christmas Eve, but years earlier. He confessed that one night Ethan had struck a pedestrian with his car, and Robert had used his influence and money to bury the story, paying witnesses to stay silent and manipulating records so no charges stuck. My stomach clenched as he spoke because it confirmed what I had long suspected, that Ethan was not just reckless but deadly, and that my parents would cover for him no matter the cost. Jake continued saying that the night of my assault, he saw Ethan afterward limping, his knuckles scraped, his voice brimming with arrogance as he bragged, "My folks will make it disappear just like last time." Olivia listened intently and asked if Jake would testify. At first, he hesitated, fearing retaliation, but then he said he could no longer live with the guilt. In court, the revelation dropped like a bomb. The judge's eyes widened, the gallery gasped, and Robert's face turned ashen. Diane shook her head furiously, mouthing lies, but the damage was done. Jake's testimony painted a picture not of a single night's cruelty, but of a pattern of corruption stretching years. Ethan stared at his former friend with venom, his fists clenching on the table. When Olivia cross-examined Jake, provided dates, locations, even the name of a bartender who once helped him drag a passed-out Ethan away from a wreck, the twist landed with devastating clarity. My family were not just abusers in private, but criminals who had manipulated the system. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras buzzed, and the whispers in the courtroom swelled. For me, it was a moment of both horror and vindication. Horror at how far my parents had gone to protect Ethan, and vindication that the truth was finally surfacing. The world could now see what I had endured. The twist did not erase my pain, but it stripped away the last of their mask. The day of the verdict, the courthouse buzzed with reporters and spectators pressed shoulder to shoulder, their eyes hungry for the outcome of the Mitchell trial. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Olivia, my palms slick with sweat, though my voice inside felt calm, like a storm had passed, and only clarity remained. The judge entered and silence fell. He reviewed the evidence once more, his words steady and deliberate, recounting the photographs of my bruises, the insurance documents where my name was erased, Linda's testimony of pulling me from the snow, and finally Jake Miller's shocking revelations of Ethan's hidden crimes. Each detail stacked together formed a wall of truth so high it could not be scaled. Robert shifted in his seat, his jaw locked tight. Diane clutched her pearls with trembling hands, and Ethan sat hollow-eyed, the swagger drained from him. When the judge spoke his decision, his voice rang like a bell of reckoning. Ethan Mitchell is sentenced to 7 years in state prison for aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and obstruction of justice. Robert and Diane Mitchell are found liable for conspiracy to commit fraud and emotional abuse. They are ordered to pay $950,000 in damages to Claire Mitchell and are prohibited from contacting her. The courtroom erupted with murmurs, gasps, and the frantic scratching of pens on notepads. My breath caught and then released in a slow exhale. I was not broken. I was not erased. I had been heard. Reporters swarmed outside as Olivia and I stepped onto the courthouse steps. Microphones thrust toward me and questions flew through the cold air. I gave one statement. My name is Claire Mitchell. I was left for dead by my family, but today the truth stood taller than their lies. That night, the news spread across every channel. Headlines read, "Daughter wins case against family after Christmas nightmare." The image of me walking with my cane beside Olivia became a symbol not of weakness but of survival. Messages poured in from strangers, survivors of abuse, people who had been silenced. They said my fight gave them courage. Months later, when the dust had settled, I used part of the settlement money to rent a small storefront in town. It took months of planning, painting walls, fixing plumbing, and gathering furniture, but finally the doors of Second Dawn Cafe opened. I did not build it to get rich. I built it to create a place where no one felt erased. The walls were lined with bookshelves holding donated novels. A jar on the counter collected funds to help survivors restart. Linda came every morning and sat by the window sipping her tea, her presence a reminder that even in darkness there are witnesses of light. Olivia visited on weekends, her laughter mixing with the chatter of new regulars. One afternoon, as sunlight poured across the floor, I stood behind the counter, apron tied around my waist, watching people linger over coffee. They were not here just for drinks. They were here because they felt safe. A young woman with fading bruises on her arm whispered thank you before leaving a $20 bill in the jar. My eyes stung, but I smiled. I had built something out of the ashes of betrayal. My limp remained, and some nights the scars throbbed, but I no longer hid them. They reminded me of the road I had walked out of hell. I often thought of Robert Diane and Ethan locked in their own cages of consequence, their names forever tied to the story they tried to bury. They had wanted me dead in spirit, but instead, they gave birth to my resilience. As I closed the cafe one evening, I stepped outside and looked up at the night sky. Stars blinked like the lights on that Christmas tree years ago. But now they no longer mocked me. They were mine. Justice had not erased the past, but it had given me back my name and my future. And in that quiet rebirth, I realized they could never take from me what I had rebuilt with my own hands. When I finally looked back on everything that had happened, I knew my story was not only about one violent Christmas night, but about the silence that followed and the way I refused to stay buried. I wanted people to hear not just the details of my pain, but the truth of survival. So I sat one evening in the quiet of Second Dawn Cafe after closing, placed my phone on the counter, and began recording. My voice was steady as I said, "My name is Claire Mitchell. Last Christmas my father struck me, my mother told me I was dead to them, and my brother laughed while I bled. They tried to erase me from their lives and from every record that proved I belonged. They filed papers, changed chats, and told the world I had disappeared. But the truth is I was there and I survived." I paused, staring into the lens, then continued. "Some families choose cruelty over love. Mine chose to bury me in lies. But I dug myself out with evidence, with witnesses, with the courage to speak. And now I stand before you, not erased, but alive, not broken, but stronger. My story is not only mine. It belongs to every person who has been silenced, to every child told they were worthless, to every survivor who thought their voice did not matter. If you are watching this, I ask you one question. What would you do if your own family declared you dead while you still breathed? Would you stay silent or would you fight back? Leave your answer in the comments because your voice deserves to be heard." I leaned forward and ended the recording. Uploading it, I watched the progress bar crawl, then finish. Within minutes, responses appeared. Some offered prayers, others shared their own stories of betrayal, many demanded justice for those still silenced. Reading them, I realized this was bigger than my family. It was about the power of refusing to vanish. I closed my laptop and whispered into the empty room they buried me, but I was a seed, and this is what grew. If you believe voices like mine should never be erased, then share this story, subscribe for more, and let us build a community where no survivor ever feels alone again.